What's going on, everybody? It is that time again. It's the Sooners Illustrated Podcast, episode 68, on this Wednesday, special Wednesday show, March 20th, 2024. Josh Callaway, Collin Kennedy. It's our third episode in 6 days, and it's a Wednesday in the middle of March, but it's as loaded of a show as we've had in quite a while. We have a lot to talk about. Coaching rumors, spring camp rumblings, obviously recruiting never stops. Also a little basketball recruiting maybe. And Porter Moser just held an insane press conference yesterday. So we have a lot to talk about, a lot to get into. CK on a Wednesday. Let's start, let's go right into it. Let's not delay. The spring camp, which is underway. We've had 1 week of practices already. They're off this week for spring break. They will resume next Monday, and they have 12 more practices leading up to that spring game on April 20th. So they've only had 3 practices under their belt. They weren't open to the media. Brent Venables decided he wanted to wait on that sort of thing, which he hasn't done the last 2 years, but he decided to do it this year. Wanted to wait to do media like open windows and things like that. Obviously, we still hear some things, some rumblings from afar. Collin, you put up a lot of notes, again, for our VIP members earlier in the week. So I wanted to kind of bring at least a few of those up here on the podcast. We'll start offensively. Just anything. I'm sure anybody listening will take anything right now in late March. What have you been hearing as far as some guys that have stood out so far and maybe newcomers, I should say, that have made an early impression? Anything offensively that has stuck out to you from what you've heard so far through 1 week of spring camp?
Yeah, really only 3 practices, right? And
yeah,
so it's all very fresh, and they're now, like you mentioned, on spring break. So those first 3 practices aren't going to be anything groundbreaking. You're trying to ease these players in, make sure no one gets hurt, just get some chemistry building, and maybe get the legs underneath these guys as they transition from a grueling winter workout schedule into what spring practices look like. I think you have to start with the guy, Jackson Arnold, right? The early indicators are really nothing groundbreaking. It just seems like, in speaking with some people in the know, he's just continued to kind of get his feet underneath himself and settle in as Oklahoma's starting quarterback. Got better and better as the practices went along, kind of seemingly left on a high note prior to spring break. But I think a lot of people are very excited about his progression, becoming the leader of this program, and he's shown that to this point, it sounds like, through the first 3 practices. But on that offense, like you mentioned, starting there, I think kind of going back to DeMarco Murray, this running back room is going to be a strength, and they have yet to add Taylor Tatum, right?
Right.
Gavin Sawchuk, to me, has continued to prove from winter workouts through the early portion of spring ball that he is a focal point within this offense, and he's also shown that literally on the field with ripping off 5 straight 100-yard games, 6 straight 100-yard games to end the year. Gavin Sawchuk doing really well, that running back room settling in. And then, of course, eventually they'll add Taylor Tatum, and I think there's a lot of optimism about what they can do out of the backfield. I mean, the receiver room is stacked.
Mm-hmm.
Don't need to dive into that much there. Yeah. Very excited to see what Deion Burks is going to do, man. This is one of the guys that I was very high on, obviously. I think Deion Burks, them getting him out of the portal, huge. This is an NFL player in my mind that is going to start in the slot and take over the role that was previously occupied by Drake Stoops. And so in some ways, you're getting a completely different skill set, but you're also getting someone who can probably produce at a similar level and maybe even bring something a little bit different to the table, right? I mean, Deion Burks he's fascinating from what he can accomplish on the field, but also I think he's very similar to Drake in that he's an extremely competitive player, right? Like, we knew Drake just simply wanted to go out there and compete, win by whatever means necessary. The early reviews are that Deion Burks is very similar from a mindset perspective. Very excited about his skill set translating to that slot role. Think he's pretty much a firm starter. And then you basically close out with what everyone wants to talk about, right? The offensive line is through 3 practices. I don't think that firm answers have been provided yet, but a lot of positive progress is being made. Yeah. And part of that has to do, obviously, with winter workouts and how these guys kind of built up their bodies and their stamina to prepare for being a member of that front five at a place like Oklahoma. And then from there, I think you asked me about newcomers. I think if you're talking about the offensive line, the guy that I've really heard a lot of positive reviews about is Febechi from North Texas. I just think this is someone who OU is incredibly pleased with both on and off the field. I feel like this is a guy, nothing's obviously definite through 3 practices of lesser work, obviously, but I think this is someone who's legitimately going to find a way to secure a starting spot by the end of spring ball. I just feel like the work ethic he has, the mentality, the personality, the willingness to be coached. And then you talk about the fact that he officially measured in at 6'4", 326 pounds, borderline 330 pounder at 6'4". He's a big dude and he's athletic and there's some versatility to his game as well. So I think that was a really quality addition by Oklahoma in the portal. And from the frame to the mindset to the ability, Febechi to me is someone in the early goings that's impressing along that offensive line.
Yeah, the sense I've gotten, to kind of piggyback off your notes and what you said there is, and rightfully so, there's immense confidence in the skill positions. I mean, it's a very deep group of the receiver room. Off the tight end room's got a total makeover with the guys they brought in, with Devon Mitchell, and obviously Bauer Sharp and Jake Roberts. And they got a guy who's going to get him the football with Jack Sonor. But there is an optimism that they're going to be fine in that offensive line room. We've talked about it to death since the end of the season. You lose all 5 starters, not a spot you're in often, not a spot you ever want to be in. And it's early, but there's an optimism that I think we're going to be all right here. That's kind of the sense that I've gotten, especially like you said, with Febechi coming in, the other transfers they've added with Hatchett and Tarquin, Spencer Brown, some of those other young guys coming up. I believe you mentioned in your notes package a couple of the young guys, Hito Zaida, I think, and maybe Logan Howland. A couple, obviously Jacob Sexton is back. Again, it's super early. They've had 3 practices, and there's a lot to be still learned. It's not like they're ready to go play week 1 right now in the SEC or something, but there's an optimism that I think we did all right here. We're going to be fine. That's the early sense that I've gotten. So we'll see how it plays out. It's early, but there's something you want to hear. There's not an overall, it'd be much worse if 3 practices in, it was like, okay, we have problems. We're going to need to maybe hit the portal a little further. That's not the sense I'm getting, at least right now. And it's still very early, but take that for its worth. Defensively, obviously this defense is very exciting. A lot of fans are very much looking forward to what this group can be. They bring back all the big names, obviously, that we've talked about a lot: Stutzman, Bowman, Downs, Washington. And then they added some fun guys, especially in that freshman class. Only a handful of transfers, obviously, with like Caden Wooler and Des Malone, Alaska. Mm-hmm. What are some things you're hearing on the defensive side so far as early standouts, first few practices?
Yeah, man. Another guy that well, I was really high on whenever Oklahoma added him, and I think he's paying off to this point, again, through 3 practices, but I think Desjon Malone was a really underrated get for OU out of the portal. Mm-hmm. You're talking about a size, length type of corner who has experience playing the field position as a cornerback at the high level FBS football type of role. He's been solid. And I think he is someone who, because of his experience, settled in rather quickly. I think he's a confident player, but he's not the type of cornerback who maybe is going to talk your ear off after a snap or what have you. He's not necessarily one of those cornerbacks that you're always seeing on like mic'd up or whatever. You know what I mean? But
yeah,
Desjon Malone knows what he's doing. And I think that that's been on display through the first few practices. And because of that, I think that's allowed Oklahoma to kind of experiment with what that secondary is going to look like, right? I mean, Woody Washington, the versatility that could be in his game is being experimented with. And then you keep in mind that they're waiting on Gentry to come back.
It's a big opportunity for Des Malone right now with to make some inroads with Gentry out for camp.
And it sounds like he's doing exactly that, to your point.
Yeah.
So in a world where you get all three of these guys healthy and you have legitimately three veteran starting caliber cornerbacks, what do? I think what's clear, again, through the first three practices is that Oklahoma is willing to experiment with ways to get potentially all three of these guys on the field one day. So some work being done on that front. Obviously, some familiar faces are in the mix. But the last thing I wanted to mention, because we have a loaded show and there's so many other things that we need to talk about. Defensive line. Seems like they're excited about the progression, even though obviously devastating news to lose Jacob Lacey. We talked about that at length, I believe, last week. I still think they're really confident in how this defensive line group is going to shape up. You look at the defensive tackles, Dejon Terry is in the midst of embracing his role as the leader of the interior. Just a zero shock to hear that Jaden Jackson is killing it, right? I still believe that everyone's firm opinion is he's going to be playing a lot. But David Stone is kind of seemingly in that mix too. I think he's built well. I think he's moving well. I think he's coachable. I think he's embracing a lot of what this transition looks like, going from the days of being a five-star caliber player to places like IMG to now the highly touted returning son, if you will, at OU at a premium position. A lot of competitiveness, though, within that defensive line room, and I think it reflects those guys, from them to obviously someone like a Ashton Sanders, who's trying to work his way onto the field. And then that defensive end and edge group, I think, to me, is now becoming one of the most fascinating cores on this roster. Like, we haven't spent a lot of time talking about this, but you're looking at a group that features Ethan Downs, Trace Ford, R. Mason Thomas, PJ Adebaware, Caden Woolard, just to name a few. I think there's a lot of guys in that room, just in that list alone, who are starting caliber players.
Right.
So how are you going to handle that? Sounds like that's also a balance they're trying to strike through spring practices, but some of those guys on that list doing really well so far. And I think you have to be really encouraged by the fact that Oklahoma, I really think that they probably feel about as good as they felt about the defensive line specifically in a really long time. And potentially more reinforcements on the way. We'll see. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think so far through spring practices, kind of the spots that you were really curious about, whether that be the secondary or the defensive line, positive early reviews to this point.
And I'm glad you brought up Ashton Champ Sanders, because that's the name that's had a lot of buzz so far for me, as far as just he's kind of the X factor of the group in a lot of ways. I mean, we talked about it when Jacob Lacey went down. I think there was a lot of attention, and rightfully so, to Grayson Halton maybe stepping into that role, and he very well might and very likely could. And then the freshmen, obviously, with Jaden Jackson and David Stone, these guys are brought in to be difference makers. Could they be that right away? But Ashton Sanders so far, it's kind of just keep an eye on him. Okay, just put a little, dog ear the page on him, because he feels like a guy who has got an opportunity. He's created a little early buzz for himself. He's a little bit, I don't want to say a forgotten man, but kind of, don't overlook him. He's kind of hanging out, waiting in the wings, waiting for an opportunity here, and it kind of presented itself now. And so far, I think there's some question that this guy could maybe be a guy for us now, a contributor now. So that's going to be one I'm excited to see what he looks like actually out there in pads on the field next week, or I'm assuming next week. I think we'll have an open viewing window at practice next week sometime. So looking forward to that. He's going to be one I'm going to zero in on right away. And then those young linebackers too. I've talked about him before, but those kind of, obviously, about Stutzman. We know what Danny is at this point, and
sure. But
just kind of everybody else in that room, both in terms of the guys who are going into year 3, your Kip Lewis and your Jaren Kanik and your Cody McKenzie. But then that next group, that Samuel Masigo and Lewis Carter, those guys who are just monsters. Just how they are progressing into year 2 Heard only good things about those guys.
Mm-hmm.
Excited to actually see them with my own two eyes. That linebacker room is crazy deep, and they brought everybody back, and it's gonna be fun to watch. So good stuff at spring camp. And again, we'll keep on pumping it. Become a VIP subscriber. We are going to continue to have camp notes throughout. Obviously, the spring, I will add one extra bonus one on the special team side. I've been told that Tyler Keltner is killing it. Florida State transfer kicker came in. Supposedly 50-plus yarders, quote, with ease so far. He's won over a lot of the team. I would say if you made me pick right now, it's March 20th. I don't have to pick right now. I think Tyler Keltner is probably going to be your kicker week 1 next year from what I've been told. So good news there. Obviously, a lot of fans were hoping for maybe a change at the kicker spot. And so far, it looks like the competitiveness in that room has progressed. And so far, Tyler Keltner, the Florida State transfer, has impressed. So has looked great so far. So overall, a lot of good things. And it's very early. It's been 3 practices. So got a long way to go. 4 weeks of practice starting next week. And then, of course, the spring game, which is a month from today, actually, April 20th. There in Norman. We'll be getting down there for that, obviously. And we'll look forward to seeing what these guys all look like in a little bit of a game situation. Over the recruiting side, we continue to mow through this just packed show. You were in Houston over the weekend. We talked about, the Under Armour camps that you had the week before in Dallas. Now this past weekend you were in Houston. It was a loaded, crop of talent, basically like a who's who of just, 4- and 5-star level players all over the place. What stuck out to you? Obviously, there was a lot of OU connections there, both targets and commits, what have you. There's a lot of names that you could go through. I guess what was maybe a handful of things that you wanted to communicate over to the fans who are tuned in about what you saw and what you heard from your weekend there in Houston?
Yeah, I would say there were a few really good football players there.
A handful.
First and foremost, a guy named Jonah Williams.
Save the roster if you have it somewhere, a sheet of everybody who was there, because then 5-6 years from now, when a bunch of them in the NFL, you can be like, geez, look how many future NFL players were at this same camp.
The amount of if you just looked at the wide receiver group, for example, at this camp, you were like, how many NFL bodies or high-level college football players are in that receiver core alone at this camp? And there were a lot. But I would tell you, man, this was a great camp. It delivered on every front. A guy named Jonah Williams won the Alpha Dog for us at 24/7. He's pretty good at football.
Shocked.
The 5-star safety, I'll start with him. I think the big thing with him is that this is very much an open and ongoing process, right? He is someone who a lot of smoke was generated around his recruitment prior to the dead period. I think he took that time in the dead period to sort of reset his mindset and consider what he wants. And now he's going to be visiting a number of different programs. There's a lot going on here, from the fact that Jonah Williams can play multiple positions on the defensive side of the ball to the fact that he's an elite level baseball player who wants to also do the dual sport athlete mold. Mm-hmm. But I think another primary takeaway for us out of that camp was that, on that note, one layer to this recruitment that's really starting to come into the fold is the potential for Jonah Williams to be drafted in the Major League Baseball draft and opt not to play college football. I mentioned at the top, I welcomed in our Ohio State visitors, right? Our Ohio State viewers. We really appreciate you being here. Ohio State's involved with Jonah Williams, as is Oklahoma, as is Texas, as is Oregon, and a number of other programs. And I think from Oklahoma maybe selling a role similar to an Isaiah Simmons, to Ohio State maybe selling Jonah Williams something similar to a Sonny Styles. And these are for instances. What I think these programs that are very much in the mix for Jonah Williams, among the several others, have to now really figure out, how can we pitch this guy on doing everything he wants to do, both as a football player and a baseball player?
Yeah.
And how can we do that effectively enough to make sure that, let's say he doesn't get drafted in the first round in the MLB draft, but he goes maybe in the first few rounds and there is a signing bonus on the table that far outweighs an NIL opportunity. For instance, how can we sell this kid on doing what he wants to do? Because I think at the end of the day, no matter who it is, who you're talking about, Ohio State, Oklahoma, Texas, that to me is the biggest domino for Jonah Williams is when does he identify the exact fit for him in the manner in which he can accomplish everything that he wants to do? Because there's a lot. He wants to do a lot of different things, from playing baseball to he's made it very known to several schools. He wants to play a number of different positions as a defensive player, wants to continue to explore how he could be utilized in different ways as well. And whoever can pitch him that the most effectively, in my opinion, is going to be the program that wins this recruitment. And that's why, this is the other part of this equation, that's why I held back on the crystal ball, right? I wrote immediately in my notes, the evening after Jonah Williams left campus, one of the first things I said was, you got to anticipate the counter punches that take place in recruiting. And I think we're kind of in the midst of that right now, because Jonah Williams' mindset is shifting as he gets a greater sense for the lay of the land. And now I don't want to say we're starting anew, but we are really entering a time frame in which Jonah Williams' recruitment could look drastically different than it did even a month or two ago. And that's something that for me was really fascinating to kind of learn more about coming out of this event. Now, before I go through the rest of the camp, I do want to mention, before I went to the camp, because it's Houston, Texas, I actually got to check in on a number of other elite football players because a ton of them live down there, and you can throw a stone and hit one of them on accident. You know what I mean? Pulled up, speaking of very versatile football players, pulled up, I want to say 2 days before, and checked in with Max Granville, the high priority edge linebacker target. If you haven't seen the video that I tweeted of Max Granville running the 300-meter hurdles, I would highly encourage you to go look at it. And that's not me encouraging you to go look at my Twitter account. That's me telling you, if you want to know what an elite edge rusher looks like,
the hurdles.
Go watch this dude at 6'3", 220 plus pounds, burst out of the gate, run the hurdles with ease, as other people who have probably trained in track their entire lives stumble over these hurdles, and he turns the corner and just nonchalantly just separates almost immediately.
Yeah.
I was dumbfounded watching him, but still get a really quality sense that Oklahoma's in a good position with him. He's set up, I believe, 5 official visits. We ran through them all. I'll have the story on Sooners Illustrated. I think that's another one, kind of similar to Jonah, in which Max is also really kind of starting to go through a little bit of a transition in his recruitment, in that he's learning a lot about how various programs in his process might see him a little bit differently from school X to school Y. I know he likes Oklahoma's pitch to him. He likes a couple other pitches. And so moving forward, Max Granville, essentially the takeaway there is the official visit schedule is going to be very key for him. And I think if Oklahoma approaches it properly, OU continued to be in prime position with one of the more versatile players in the South Central region. And finally, before I get back to the camp, again, because they're just everywhere, I think I drove 45 minutes the opposite direction the next day and checked in with Kobe Sellers and the elite 4-star cornerback out of Shadow Creek. We chopped it up for a while. I was at a linebacker session, and this is just kind of a description of Kobe. I was watching linebackers in the Houston area go through a workout, and Kobe and his dad decided to pull up, get some workouts in, and watch the session along with a few other people. But just talking to Kobe, man, I think Oklahoma is in a really good spot. I think this is also one that you've really got to monitor some of the regional powers, right? Texas A&M, Texas. But there's some interesting give and takes here when it comes to this recruitment. I know since Corey Raymond was hired at LSU, LSU has been kind of knocking down the doors for a guy who's from Louisiana. Michigan, believe it or not, is someone who Kobe mentioned to me might get an unofficial, and if things go well on that unofficial, maybe Kobe takes an official visit to Michigan, so on and so forth. But he was another who I got to sit down with in more of a exclusive setting, for lack of a better term, and I'll have that story coming up as well. So the next day, I laugh because I could even keep going. Before this camp, I got to check in with one of the best players at this camp, a guy who we named a top performer. I went to another event in Houston prior to this camp and checked in with Andrew Marsh, the 4-star wide receiver. Got to talk to him one-on-one as well before, obviously, the Sunday camp took place. And I think he's really looking forward to his Oklahoma official visit. I think he is looking forward to learning more about the future of the program. And I think that this is a player that OU is going to prioritize a little bit more moving forward, given the fact that last week we talked about Jaden Nickens decommitting. There's a little bit more of an open board. Andrew Marsh is going through his process. But there are a number of other big-name contenders for Andrew Marsh, and I think for him, he's still very much in the exploratory phase. He has so many schools he's considering still. He kind of has to get to a point right now where he's actually narrowing things down a little bit and maybe focusing on a strict number of programs. And so he's kind of in the midst of that. Got to talk to a guy named Chris Stewart, who is at Shadow Creek with Kobe Sellers. He's a 2026 wide receiver who just visited Oklahoma for Future Freaks. He said he had a really good time, enjoyed the opportunity to get to learn more about OU, wants to go back. And speaking of that, I should mention Andrew Marsh did end up making it to Future Freaks as well. So a little bit of a late visit for one of the top players in the country in 2025, said he's wanting to get back. But Chris Stewart, to me, is someone to watch because I think right now, if I remember correctly, Oklahoma's talking to him a lot. Texas is talking to him a lot. Baylor is talking to him a lot. That's kind of the early mix. And then on that note, as far as 2026, got to catch up with my guy, Jonathan Hatton Jr. again, the elite running back.
I heard very good things.
Yeah, I mean, he's the guy. I don't know what else I can say. People who have been following me know that I think Jonathan Hatton Jr. is that dude. And we've gotten to know each other a little bit. It's cool to see him kind of go from a quiet, reserved, a little bit more of a shyer kid to smiling and chuckling about the fact that he, as he put it, and I can't wait to write the story, he gets to kind of play general manager and coach to help OU football recruit players in his class. But yeah, he was awesome to talk to, looked really good in the running back stuff. And so did Tory Blaylock, the 4-star running back out of Atascocita. I can't believe how many names I still have yet to get to, so I'm going to go fast. Tory Blaylock set his commitment date, I believe, for March 29th.
Next Friday. Yeah.
I believe, personally, OU is still very much in a solid position there. I'm going to keep my crystal ball on Oklahoma. Obviously, the DeMarco Murray stuff is going to directly impact this.
Sure.
But I also believe that that's something to monitor as it relates to DeMarco Murray, right? A recruit's decision, a lot of that has to do with who they're being coached by. And so Tory Blaylock, his outlook, I personally believe there's a subtle connection to Tory and to DeMarco, just something we continue to monitor as, like we mentioned earlier in the show, so much of this is still up in the air and kind of unknown, with it being very fresh and interesting information. Cortland Guillory, defensive back in 2025, has an Oklahoma official visit. I believe has a Texas official visit. Kind of the read I get there to this point is that Texas probably a little bit more heavily involved, but Oklahoma still very much in the mix for him. And I think that this is a player who I'm personally monitoring, because if OU pushes and really surges in this recruitment, we've talked a little bit about it, but this 2025 defensive back class for Oklahoma is very fascinating to me, especially relative to the amount of spots that might be expendable. Cortland Guillory's kind of a wild card, in my opinion. And he had a lot of praise about Oklahoma and that program. I know he's very much looking forward to his official visit. But right now you're talking about, I mean, off the top of my head, Kobe Sellers, Cortland Guillory, Tristan Haynes, Malik Hawkins, Jonah Williams, who I also just talked about, Marcus Wimberly, Amarian Robinson, so many other names in kind of that corner safety mold. And if you're limited from a spots perspective, how are you going to approach this? I think Cortland Guillory, by the way, he was also a top performer for us, if I remember correctly. Thoroughly impressed by what he put on tape in this camp setting. Really good football player, has safety to corner versatility, and he's aggressive, which I think Oklahoma likes. He's very aggressive at the catch point. Maybe a little handsy, but he brings a level of intensity that I think programs, especially in the SEC to maybe the Big 12, will really want as a South Central regional guy. I will close, because again, we could keep going. I'll close with Landon Rank, the defensive lineman in the Houston area. And I'm sorry, folks, I'll have a lot more hopefully on the board, so maybe subscribe. You can get even further coverage, but
maybe.
While
you're at it, while you're just moseying on over.
You hop on the board and maybe you'll learn a little bit more why I think Landon Rank's recruitment is really going to get interesting over the next few weeks. So essentially what it kind of boils down to, without getting into the true nitty gritty, he was on Ohio State's campus yesterday at the time of this recording. So he went Under Armour camp. He told me he was going to get up the next day and fly to Columbus, visit Ohio State, which is just wild when you really think about it. Like, these 16-year-old kids are going through one of the bigger camps in all of America, getting up the next day and going to a place like Ohio State on a Monday morning. And then you've got Penn State getting in the mix more. You've got Oklahoma and Texas A&M really surging here. I know he's excited to get back to Oklahoma. He told me he'll probably be back in the spring, and then he'll have his official visit in the summer. And then obviously we know that Texas is kind of the hovering cloud, if you will, with his number of connections to the program. But I think that a lot of us at 24/7 have reported kind of on the fact that although Landon Rank, his father went to Texas, family members went to Texas, has friends at Texas, there's maybe a little bit of a separation between Landon Rank and Texas right now. And so why I think this one is so fascinating, I think not even a couple weeks ago, you probably would have sat here and said, okay, if Texas is maybe taking a step back, that opens the door for Oklahoma and Texas A&M, right? And I would have said absolutely. But now, again, Ohio State viewers, what I think you are very intrigued to know as you tune along here on the show, one of my personal greater tracks that needs to get accomplished is Landon Rank truly a primary target at Ohio State? Because if that's the case, you're talking about a program. Obviously, we know what Ohio State's track record is on the defensive line. He mentioned that Coach Johnson is hitting him up daily at this point, which I think is pretty interesting. And then, a guy kind of from my neck of the woods who I think the world of, Brandon Jordan, who was hired at Ohio State. If you know anything about Brandon Jordan, you know why he's such a big hire. If you don't know anything about him, for years and years, he was considered the best defensive line trainer like in the NFL. I mean, he had clients in the NFL flying down to Houston to work with him. He still works with a number of NFL clients, spent some time at Michigan State, then transitioned to the Seattle Seahawks. He's now back at the collegiate level with Ohio State. I believe his title is pass rush specialist or defensive line assistant. I can't remember correctly. But Ohio State's defensive line coaching situation is incredible. And we're talking about an Ohio State program. Obviously, I've been there for a game. It's incredible. It's an elite program. And so Landon Rink's recruitment, if Ohio State and then Penn State, where he's never been before, but he told me he's going to check out campus very soon. If those two big-name Big Ten programs get more involved with Landon Rink, then all of a sudden this recruitment really gets murky, and we're kind of entering unknown territory with a guy who clearly is being coveted by some of the biggest names in college football. So that's how I'll end it. Very interested in how Landon Rink's situation plays out. And again, it literally started yesterday with him visiting Ohio State.
So, yeah, there was a lot of guys there.
I couldn't even get to them all. You know what?
Crazy. I'm
being a bum right now. I can't touch on all the recruits. You know what I mean?
It's nuts because as you were going through some of the names, when last week when we were talking about it, and just me kind of keeping up a little bit from afar, it was really like, my God, everyone is there. Everyone is down there. It's insanity. And like you said, I heard great things about Jonathan Hatton, and that guy is a monster. And that 2026 group, and yeah, lots of great stuff there from you. And so we'll obviously continue to keep up. Like you said, Blaylock, the next one, that's kind of, he's committing next Friday. So that's kind of the next one that fans will be really glued in on. We'll probably get a little temperature check on him next week on the show, right before he commits on Friday, on the next week's Thursday show. But lots of like right now for Oklahoma, lots of big name players that they're in on, have a shot at. And obviously we'll continue to update you, everybody on the show, and as well, obviously, our VIP members pretty regularly over the next however long as Oklahoma chases all these big names. It's not real often that we do a lot of basketball recruiting or transfer portal stuff, but I did want to do one guy here on the back end of the show as we start to wind down here. Brandon Garrison. So Brandon Garrison's a name that obviously Oklahoma fans are probably mostly aware of. He played his high school basketball at Del City, which is just right down the road. I saw him play over there at Del City many times. He won a state title as a senior. Just a big, imposing figure. Not a lot of people can really match up with him in high school. He was a McDonald's All-American. He ends up going to Oklahoma State as a starter for them as a true freshman. Does some nice things. Obviously, I got to see him play in person twice at Oklahoma State this year when they played Oklahoma. Mike Boynton gets fired after 7 years in Stillwater. Not surprisingly, some Oklahoma State guys hit the portal. That includes Brandon Garrison. Oklahoma is considered to be in the mix here. Obviously, Collins would be huge. This is a plug-and-play starter for you if you could find a way to do it. What's your read on Oklahoma's chances for Brandon Garrison on the transfer portal? Because obviously Oklahoma fans are still trying to, they're still reeling from what happened on Selection Sunday. We talked about it all on the Monday show. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Porter Moser's press conference in just a minute. But boy, what a quick way to turn the page to next year if you could find a way to make this happen. What's your sense of the possibility that it could at this point? It's early. He just got in the portal. The portal just opened. Sources have told Students Illustrated he has a do not contact tag, so it's very early. But should Oklahoma fans get excited here even a little bit about the possibility of getting Brandon Garrison to come aboard, make the move from the Bedlam transfer, which has become more and more normal the last several years?
I think they absolutely have every right to get excited here. I mean, I know that the other day you guys talked a lot about Oklahoma's decision to opt out of the NIT. Mm-hmm. And I believe it was your point where you said it's time to go all in on this offseason. I mean, it's a make or break offseason.
Yeah.
This is why you do it, right? I mean, folks, this is the number one ranked transfer portal player in all of college basketball right now, at a time where I believe we're up well over 300 names in the transfer portal this current window, and I believe it opened on Monday.
Yeah.
We're 2 days in, basically 3 days in, and Brandon Garrison is the consensus number one guy.
Yeah.
And Oklahoma's in on him. I mean, folks know, obviously, Tom and Josh head up our basketball coverage. They do a great job, but I think a lot of people who follow me and have followed me through the years, especially my first time around on the OU beat, they knew that I covered basketball recruiting very extensively back then. And so I have the ability when I need to pick up the phone and call people who I trust in that space. And the read that I get, talking to a number of different sources in varying levels, This is the player that Oklahoma is making very apparent immediately. This is the number one priority for this program.
It should be. Yeah.
It should be, because I saw a comment. Obviously, we talk a lot about how the fans' perspective of this program, to me, at times can be very relatable. I think I saw a comment on our YouTube channel saying essentially, you cannot miss the NCAA tournament 3 years in a row at a place like Oklahoma. And now you really can't miss a fourth year in a row, especially in the transition to the SEC. And so this is why you go get this guy. You try and do whatever it takes, because this is an elite post presence. And we know OU basketball for years has been clamoring for an elite post presence. Former McDonald's All-American, number one ranked transfer portal player, a guy who 6'11" listed. We'll see if that's actually what he is. I don't, you know what I mean? Like, maybe he's getting that college boost.
I looked it up. Yeah, 6'11" is what he's listed, right? What he's listed.
Exactly. But the bottom line here is, this is a guy who's highly praised for being a smart, aware basketball player at a premium position and is efficient on both ends of the floor. And that's the kind of player that elevates you going into a completely new setting, a brand new conference. And so in a world where this truly, to me, is the defining offseason for Porter Moser and the staff, this is the must get. And I laid out some stuff for our subscribers, so go ahead and, again, go check it out. I laid out why to our subscribers there are other factors at play that shape what's going on here. And essentially what I will say, to me, what will decide how this is going to go, almost very similar to the DeMarco thing that we talked about earlier. What decides how this is going to go is how Brandon Garrison wants to shape his timeline, what decisions he wants to make. Because Oklahoma is involved, Kansas is involved, I believe there's some Miami smoke as well. But should Garrison decide to wrap this thing up quicker, I believe that favors certain programs. If he decides to extend this process and let it play out, I believe that then shifts how things fall in terms of who has the advantage then moving forward. And so that's kind of the last thing I'll say on it. It, in both, the way to I'll phrase both of these scenarios, for DeMarco Murray and Brandon Garrison, in talking to sources, it all kind of just is best summed up as, the ball is in your court. You know what I mean? Like, time for you to figure out what you want to do. Yeah. And we don't know on either front what those mindsets are. And so for Brandon Garrison, the ball is in his court. But being the number one ranked transfer portal player in college basketball, you can take a lot of different directions here. And it really comes down to how he wants to attack his personal process.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is a kid that, you know, I got to see him play a lot at Del City, and it was always hard to kind of evaluate him because not a lot of high schools in Oklahoma have somebody to match up with somebody who was, I think, 6'8" or 6'9" at the time. So it was kind of hard to tell. You know, I was like, yeah, obviously he's good. He can play ball. He's coordinated, and he has some skills for as big as he is. But when the competition got better in the state tournament, his play just kept rising and rising and rising, and he was a massive reason why Del City won the state title his senior year. I watched it at the Lloyd Noble Center, coincidentally. Him win a state championship, and his level of play, it rose to the moment every time they needed it. And I had very little doubt that he was going to be a good player at the next level. And of course, he gets right in the starting lineup right away at Oklahoma State this year. Now they had a tough year, but he was a bright spot on it. And this is a guy that if you have any ability to cobble something together in your NIL or whatever, this is a guy you got to find a way. You put him at the 5, maybe John Hughley, if you can retain him, you could play him maybe alongside him at the 4. I mean, it quickly comes together. Now you have to keep your roster together, obviously, and there's no telling what that's going to look like for Oklahoma. But this would be a huge get, obviously, and we'll keep an eye on it. Wouldn't necessarily rule out Oklahoma State either. We'll see who they hire, and maybe that has an influence. The impression I got was I don't think he was necessarily looking to leave until Boynton got fired. So if they make a hire that he likes, maybe they could find a way to keep him. Who knows?
Caden Proctor taught us you can do anything. Anything is possible. The last thing I do want to mention, and because I feel like this discussion is more suited to the podcast setting, right? The other kind of this is more so conjecture or whatever. This isn't intel related, folks. This is me having a discussion with you and Josh. The other thing that I think is kind of interesting here, because you mentioned Oklahoma State, I texted with a couple people when I was digging up information, and the other layer to this is like, what role, if any, does someone like a Javon Small have in this recruitment, who was Oklahoma State's, you mentioned Garrison was a bright spot for Oklahoma State. Small was Oklahoma State's leading scorer, if I remember correctly. And now he is in the transfer portal, and it looks like a number of elite programs in college basketball have already started to reach out. The big thing for Oklahoma, and I think this is also pertinent to mention while we're on the pod, as things stand today, and you correct me here, OU's only got one expendable scholarship spot remaining as the roster is currently structured.
As of now, yeah.
That can easily change, and let's be fair here, it probably will change.
Yeah.
But if it does change, this is why I bring it up. Would Oklahoma, let's say in a world where Garrison does decide to extend this timeline, would Oklahoma kick the tires on someone like Javon Small and say, hey,
why wouldn't you? Yeah.
We're going to try and bring in this teammate of yours. You know him well. You guys both had success together. You guys get to stay in state and potentially play together. I don't know. Again, this is more so a discussion, but I texted some people the other day. I was like, man, what role, if any, does someone like a Javon Small have in Garrison's new portal recruitment? Because there's so many other avenues, again, that you can take, even literally deciding to return to Oklahoma State. I do wonder if Garrison, because he valued his relationship with Mike Boynton so much, I wonder what other relationships could impact the recruitment for, again, the number one ranked player in the college basketball transfer portal.
No, it's a great point. It's a great point. And like you said, as it stands now, and we know there will be more turnover than it's likely, just the nature of college basketball, especially college sports, but college basketball especially. But as of now, you're only shedding Latrey Darthur, Rivaldo Soares, and Max Klanjek. Those guys are all graduating. Those are scholarships that are being opened, but you're signing two guys with Forsyth and Qual Attack. Attack, I think it's how you pronounce it. Great name, either way. So that's only one spot, obviously, which you could use on Garrison. But obviously, more than likely, people will portal. Who that's going to be remains to be seen. And if nobody portals and you have Garrison, great. I mean, sure, but that's just probably unrealistic, obviously. I think most fans would agree with that. So we'll see. And if you could find a way to get the package deal, I mean, that would be phenomenal, obviously, for Oklahoma. And they got to get more athletic. They did a great job of that this year, bringing guys like Jalen Moore, especially in, and signing King Cooper and bringing Rivaldo Soares. You continue to mold your team that way with guys like Garrison and obviously potentially Small if that were to happen. So lots to like. Lots to be excited about as Oklahoma continues. They did a great job remaking their team from the end of last year to this year. They had just a few guys back from, and they did a phenomenal job to almost make a tournament team, one spot shy of it. Now they hopefully can have a building block to build from there and do it again and see if they can get to that next level next year, which is something that Porter Moser talked about in his press conference yesterday. I wanted to bring it up just right. We're at the very tail end. It's been a long show. We had a lot to talk about. But at the very end here, I want to make sure I brought up the Porter Moser presser yesterday, which was, unexpected. He had never done this before. I mean, it's only his third year, but the first 2 years he didn't do this. He had an end-of-season exit interview type of press conference yesterday in Norman. It's on our YouTube channel. I recommend you watch it. It was a wild thing because he sat down there and he opened up with about a 13, 14-minute opening statement before he took a question, just talking about the season and basically the heartbreak of not making the selection, not making the bracket on Selection Sunday. He talked about how every day since December 1st, his players, he said, right or wrong, we shouldn't look at that stuff, but we're human. We can't help it, basically. We looked at projections every single day since December 1st, and every single day Oklahoma was in the bracket. The first time they didn't see Oklahoma in the bracket was the real one on Selection Sunday. and how gutted they were, and the decision to decline the NIT. They had to make the decision right away, and the guys were just devastated and basically just said, forget that, I don't want to. And he thinks that maybe if they had more time to decide, it could have been a different answer, basically, but they had to decide right away. And, when you just had your dreams shattered, because that was the goal for this roster all year, was make the tournament. They didn't have a single player on the team that had played in the tournament before. That was the goal the whole season, was to get to the tournament. And that was just snatched from them when they thought they had it on Selection Sunday. What a press conference this was. And again, I recommend people go watch it, because Porter's, people have a lot of opinions on Porter Moser and the job he's done, and they're fair. They've missed the tournament all 3 years. That's not something that you come to expect. It hasn't happened since the 70s, that we talk about on Monday's show. But you cannot, you're just not paying attention if you dock the guy for not caring or not being he was borderline in tears talking about his guys and how much he hurts for them that they're not going to get to play in the tournament when he feels like they earned it. He felt like they earned it, and they did. Did you watch that Virginia game last night? That's a team that got left out for. They scored 42 points last night.
I was filling out my bracket, and I chose Virginia to lose before the first 4 games. So that goes to show you I didn't have
Colorado State. Yeah, just mentally, that's Colorado State. So yeah, that it was a heck of a thing last night. So I want to make sure I brought it up, because it was wild that he didn't do that the last couple of years. He didn't have to do that. Nobody was going to make him. And he said, I want to talk about this. And he ripped the committee. He ripped that there's not a set criteria. And he said he hasn't got a straight answer still as to what exactly cost Oklahoma a spot. Like we talked about on Monday, no bad losses, didn't lose a single game outside of Quad 1. They won 20 games this year. They won 8 conference games. But yeah, it was a wild thing. So I want to make sure I brought that up, because I recommend fans go check it out. It might change your opinion of Porter. And again, I'm not going to push back on the fact that missing the tournament all 3 years is bad. And I know that twice they very easily could have made it. And I totally understand the counter argument of, well, get off the bubbles. You don't have to sweat it. But he's trying. He's giving it everything he's got. He's trying. And so it's going to be fun to watch how they build, and come right off that Brandon Garrison conversation as they try to build this thing out and see who they can retain moving into next year, because that's going to be the big question now as we move forward. Nobody's hit the portal yet. It's only been a few days, but nobody's hit the portal yet. And so we'll keep an eye on it. But it's going to be a fascinating offseason for that program.
Yeah, I thought it was very powerful, just catching glimpses of it when he paused, and I believe he was talking about his parents and the advice that they were giving him. And he more than once consecutively had to kind of take a break, reset a little bit. And I think that shows you that the guy cares. I don't think there's really any question. And you know what else I'll say on this? You did a great job breaking that down. The other really powerful moment in all this was Jenny Baranchek's press conference. When she went out of her way to talk about Porter Moser and the coach that he is, the human being that he is. I believe her daughter is on the OU women's basketball team, and she talked about how he is a great human being. He's never that kind of dad, but he's always very much invested in not just his players, but he's very invested in the women's basketball program and how he can help other coaches on campus. And I think what she really mentioned that stood out to me was Porter Moser is the kind of coach that you rarely find in college basketball who cares about everything else that's going on. She said, you rarely find a men's basketball coach who cares what's going on in the women's basketball program. You rarely find a men's basketball coach who's willing to invest in people around him and make sure that he's leaving a positive impact on them throughout the day. And that's an everyday occurrence, she said. And so when that guy is bringing that level of enthusiasm and effort and simply passion to the table, I really would caution people to take this guy for granted. Now, the other part of this coin is, in the same way you can say, we're not going to open up old wounds, but they definitely got hosed. I firmly believe they should have made it, and I think some of what happened last night kind of described that. You can't miss the tournament, and you've got to become a better basketball program ahead of this move to the SEC. And 4 consecutive misses of the NCAA tournament now is probably career defining when we talk about Porter Moser and not just how these seasons have gone and the end result, but also everything from being linked to other jobs more than once, kind of just the weird moments throughout the season, like the letdowns that we talk about, right? one of our board members asked about opting out of the NIT, and one thing for me was just like, man, this kind of felt like a season you just wanted to put to bed, just take a break from the craziness that was, and now you kind of enter a stretch where it's very pivotal what happens next for Porter Moser, and I think that he's shown he's going to put every ounce of his effort into bettering this program. And the last thing I'll say, to your point, now it's about roster retention, building, and continuing to structure this program to become let's say a perennial tournament contender, getting into the field consistently, because I think that's a fair goal. And so for me, the checklist is kind of as follows: land a big name or two out of the portal. Someone like Brandon Garrison, they're already attacking that. Try and keep guys like Javian McCollum, a Jalen Moore, a Caden Cooper. Try and keep those guys around as best as you can. Retain as much of that roster as you possibly can. And then from there, it's probably about getting some introspection done. Why have you consistently missed the tournament? What can be done better? And I think those are the off-season moves and questions that are going to be addressed. And yeah, man, I think that press conference, you mentioned it was powerful. And I think it was a very intriguing way to send OU men's basketball into a very key off-season.
And like I said, on the YouTube channel, so I recommend people go check it out. It's not like crazy long for Porter. It was only about 28 minutes, I think, in total, which is a short one for Brent Venables. They're very different guys as far as that goes. But yeah, it's on the YouTube channel. Go check it out. Wild stuff. And it was a conversation about the NIT too, and the fact that they had to decide immediately was very interesting. I had some fans kind of ask me, you had days to kind of decide if you would play in the NIT, and I really think Oklahoma just never really even entertained that they wouldn't be in the tournament until Sunday. And so they really never thought about it. And then they were forced to make a quick decision, and the team was just gutted, it sounded like. From the picture that Porter painted of what that room was like when the bracket came out and they weren't in it, I think it was like a funeral. I mean, it was probably, that from what he said, it was bad. And so they had to make a decision, and they said, we just forget it, So we'll see. But going to be an interesting offseason, like we said, and we'll keep up with it. Again, VIP subscriber. We'll keep you updated on all the portal movement, recruiting stuff as Oklahoma tries to build this thing back out, moving into the first year in the SEC. I think that's it. Very long show. We had a lot to talk about. Hopefully people hung with us throughout it there. We had a lot of ground to cover. I think we covered it pretty well. Be back on Monday with Tom and James, recapping whatever happens between now and then. We'll also dive more into spring football as camp continues after the week off this week for spring break. And then Collin and I will be back with you next Thursday for the latest recruiting stuff. And we'll also talk a little bit of Blaylock before that commitment on Friday.
It will also be opening day, ladies and gentlemen, next Thursday.
That's right.
So bring your gear.
Did you get up at 5 a.m. to watch Dodgers Padres this morning?
No, I did not. Believe it or not, there's a thing or two going on. I needed my beauty sleep. But the challenge, folks, Josh and I will be rocking the MLB opening day gear. So bring your favorite team gear next week when we join and reconvene on Thursday.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it. Yankees are in Houston on opening day. So big in. All right. We'll catch you guys then. Look forward to it. For Collin Kennedy, I'm Josh Callaway. We'll see you guys next time on the Sooners Illustrated podcast.